something that is really in sync with our Built Heritage program in Sushant School of Art and Architecture. Um, where we often ponder upon, what makes the authentic moment for a building. And, as is with human beings, buildings attain authentic moments several times in its life. And as one has noticed as architects also, the authentic moment is not really when it's newly finished. In fact, it's after a few years of when it's brand new that the authenticity of the building comes into its own, and the building is is in its prime. That is what is an authentic moment. And for it to be in its prime, it has to be in sync with what is happening around it. And contemporizing heritage is of key value to us in what we teach, what we learn with our students in the master's built heritage program at the Sushant School of Art and Architecture. And therefore, I feel that this is directly in sync with what we aspire to do and want to do. So, Dr. Rohit, it's of really keen interest to all of us. So I'm not going to stand between you and, keen listeners, including myself. And I hand it over to you. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Vibhuti Sachdev. I would like to introduce Dr. Rohit Jigyasu formally here, even though he does really need no introduction. But yet, so Dr. Rohit Jigyasu is a conservation architect and risk management professional from India, currently working at ICCROM as project manager on urban heritage, climate change, and disaster risk management. Dr. Jigyasu served as UNESCO Chairholder Professor at the Institute for Disaster Mitigation of Urban Cultural Heritage at Retsumiken University, Kyoto, Japan, where he was instrumental in developing and teaching international training course on disaster risk management of cultural heritage. He was the elected president of ICOMOS India from 2014 to 18 and president of ICOMOS International Scientific Committee on Risk Preparedness, ICOP, from 2010 to 19. Dr. Jigyasu has been the elected member of Executive Committee of ICOMOS since 2011 and is currently serving as its vice president for the period 17 to 20. Before joining ICCROM, Dr. Jigyasu has been working with several national and international organizations such as UNESCO, UNISDR, Getty Conservation Institute, and World Bank for consultancy, research, and training on disaster risk management of cultural heritage. Beyond that, as Dr. Vibhuti Sachdev already mentioned, he's been on our advisory board, and he's also part of our the editorial team of our journal called Veranda, Journal of Sushant School of Art and Architecture. So welcome, Dr. Rohit Jigyasu, and I would like to hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, before I move forward, I wanted to just check if everything is easily audible, and can you see the screen, my first slide?
I think you will have to present again because there was a disruption, I suppose.
Okay. I see. Okay, I'm just going to do that. Just a second. Okay, just a second. Somehow. For some reason, I can't see my presentation on there. Let me check again. I think for some reason I can't see the presentation that I have. Just a second. I have to open it again then.
Right. Yeah. Maybe that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see now. I have no clue why it is not coming. because it just shows me one screen. I mean, it doesn't show me multiple windows it was showing earlier. So I'm wondering like what the problem is. What I'll do is maybe I'll have to come out and then come again. I think that seems like
So
the
you
way.
might have to rejoin the call.
Okay. Okay. Can you let's see. No. No, for some reason I can't see the I can't see the presentation I was seeing before. No.
Parul ma'am, your mic is off.
Maybe you could try presenting your screen then. Maybe that will help.
Yeah,
Instead
when
of
I
the
do
window.
that, yeah. When I do that, I just see only. Okay, let's see. Let's try that.
You click on the screen and then you go to your PPT.
Yeah. I'll do that. Okay, is it now? Can you see the first slide now?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So thank you very much, Dr. Sasdev, and also Parul and everyone else who has been inviting me for this. I'm always happy to present all the thoughts and the work that we have been doing. And it's extreme privilege to also share it with students because I'm sure they will have interesting reflections on it. And we can then have a discussion probably after the presentation as well. So in case at any point you are not able to hear because of technical issue or you're not able to really follow me, just let me know, just interrupt in between. But we will take discussions after I finish my presentation. Okay, so as you know, I talk about building resilience of urban heritage to integrating climate action. But before I move there, I would like to just explain what is ICCROM, where I work right now. ICCROM is the International Center for the Study of the Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property. And those who are studying conservation would definitely know about this organization. It is one of the advisory bodies of UNESCO for the World Heritage. Plus, it is also an intergovernmental organization. So it has 134 member states across the world, who are part of ICCROM, and the main mandate of ICCROM is to promote conservation of all forms of cultural heritage in every region of the world. So we support countries, member states, in achieving their objectives, which is to really help in capacity building, in which we call training, in providing adequate state-of-the-art information, research, and then definitely cooperation and advocacy. And interesting thing I want to tell you is that ICCROM has a connection with India very much because the decision to set up ICCROM was taken up in the 9th session of UNESCO in New Delhi in 1956. And Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was the one who was presiding that. And I think it was quite a visionary leadership at that moment who could actually recognize the importance of heritage and how India should be patronizing this, even when we had just gained independence a few years ago. So let me now come to the topic of climate change. We all know about climate change. I mean, it's not something that I'm going to say and you don't know about it. We all know it. But I'll just show you a few slides to bring forward what's really happening with climate change. If you see this map, it really shows you how there is a surface temperature change in a matter of a decade or so. And you can see that the temperature has really risen more than 1.5 degrees in most of the world, because all that bright red is where the temperature has risen from 1.25 to 1.5 degrees in last 100 years, which 1.2 sounds like might sound to be not very high temperature, but if you look at the global average, it's an extremely high temperature. which affects every kind of thing. It affects the whole life in general. And we also have observed changes in the annual precipitation over land. So you can see that the number of years with high rainfall, it's not a question of average rainfall increasing, but there are few days where there's much higher rainfall than the other days. So maybe the average might be even, suggesting you that the rainfall is decreasing, but there would be few days when the rains would be much higher than even the average annual rainfall. So you find that you get a huge amount of water in a very little amount of time, and that's something which is quite worrying. Also, when I go back to my previous slide, when I was showing you about the temperature change, I want to make one point clear, that whether it is change in temperature, whether it is change in humidity, it is not that temperature is rising and humidity is rising all over the world. In fact, we use the word climate variability because there are parts of the world where climate is, the temperature is rising, but there are other parts of the world where temperature is decreasing as well, on average. So it's very uneven distribution, and we can't say like the whole world is increasing at the same rate or has the same phenomena. The phenomena is very different, and that is an important element for us to keep in mind as we go and understand how climate change affects cultural heritage. Look, so now you can see how what is projected in the future. So what is projected in the future is really worrying, because actually in almost, I would say that we cannot control how the temperature and the humidity is going to change over in the next 20-30 years until 2050, and it's going to significantly rise. Only thing we can do is that we can maybe lessen the rate of increase, but definitely we have come to a point where we can really see that there is going to be much more higher temperatures and precipitation or rainfall in the next 20-30 years. And definitely it will impact our cities, where you see on the graph, on the right side, you see that some of the cities will witness, are witnessing or going to witness increase in temperature in their warmest month. Like if you say, for example, in case of Delhi, you see 3.5 degrees Celsius is the increase in temperature, let's say during May or June, when it is warmest there. So that's the kind of figures we are referring to. And definitely what we are also visiting, we also know is that the greenhouse gas emissions are going to increase. And if we don't do anything now, then you will see a graph which is what you see, the blue line, right? So it is still increasing, you can see, but you can just make it a little bit less exponential. But if you don't do anything and you continue to let things go as they are right now, you see how it's going to be with that red line that is going up like exponentially. Okay, so that means that the global temperatures are going to rise, and along with that, we are also going to have extreme climate-related disaster events. The catastrophic events like droughts, floods, storms. They are going to be more and more. So that's projection. But if you look at what has happened from 1990 to 2016, you already see that there is an upward trend, right? But it is not very uniform. It goes a little bit low, but then it goes extremely high. So that's the kind of variation we are looking at. So what is business as usual scenario for 2050? If the policymakers fail to cut greenhouse gas emissions, then the temperature rise is going to be ignored, and global greenhouse gas emissions will peak in 2030. So that is when it is going to be very high, and then it is begin to fall due to drop in the fossil fuel use. But the damage will already be done, and the warming will reach like 3 degrees Celsius. Then the other phenomena which is associated with climate change is sea level rise, and it is now projected that the sea level rise would be 1.6 feet. and it's already increased 1.6 feet, but it is likely to increase by 10 feet in next, let's say, 70 years, 80 years, till 2100. So 55% of the population who are living in the areas are subject to more than 20 days of lethal heat in a year beyond the human threshold of survivability. And some, as I mentioned, that some of the areas will be facing weather extremes. And I'm sure you are reading news and you are very much aware of what's happening in California right now, where there is unprecedented fires, and San Francisco, Los Angeles, and many important cities and on the west coast are really under threat, because of these fires. There is another thing which we have to be mindful of, and that's the displacement of people. We can say that in 30 years, we are already facing the mangrove destruction. The ecosystems are really getting destroyed. You are all aware what has happened in Brazil with the Amazon fires in Amazon forest, which have really affected the vegetation, the both flora and fauna, and of course the living beings. What will happen is that many areas in the world will become unlivable, and also you will face acute shortage of water. Food production is going to fall, and because of drought and heat waves, and then flooding and storms. And we also know that there's going to be increased conflicts, and we already know that there are reasons for many parts of the world facing conflicts because of the lack of availability of natural resources like water, or or land which could be cultivated as it used to be. So that's the kind of impact on the people that's going to be happening. So what does that mean for cities? So absolutely, cities will be the most impacted compared to the other parts, because of the fact that the density is much higher there. You create local heat islands. I suppose you understand that the microclimate of cities is much higher than the hinterland, because of the very little green area. Most of the area gets paved, or and then there is higher density, then there's use of infrastructure. So the overall temperature is much higher, which is concentrated on the microclimate in the cities. And definitely rising ocean levels will make many of the most populous cities in the world uninhabitable, whether we think about Mumbai or Jakarta or Hong Kong or Shanghai. So that's also a kind of a thing we have to keep in mind, that the impact on cities is going to be much more than the other parts of the world or non-urban areas. But the fact is that we are already facing the brunt. We already know that the impact is huge, and we are already have in a way really not able to manage this kind of extreme situation. Climate change is no longer a guess game. It's a reality, and we suffer from it. And just to show you some examples, in India, we know there are so many urban floods now. You have heard how Mumbai faced floods this year, and it's become a more recurring phenomena, right? A few years ago, Chennai had flooding, Srinagar faced floods, Ujjain had floods last year, and in 2015, Ahmedabad. So all our major cities are facing floods, and definitely historic urban areas are much more vulnerable, because the infrastructure is very poor, and they are simply not able to take that amount of rainfall coming in such a short period of time. So and then you have other kind of catastrophic events like Hurricane Sandy, which affected New York in 2012. And so what we have to also understand is that it's not just the storm or the flood, but there are also some things that follow up after these events. So when there was a storm, it was followed by huge fire in the historic neighborhood, and significantly damaging a large amount of wooden houses in the historic quarters of New York. So it's kind of multiple events unfolding. Bangkok faced massive floods in 2011, and then they also faced floods 2 years ago in 2018, and many important sites. This is not in Bangkok but nearby, archaeological site of Ayutthaya, which was flooded, and water just could not get out for so many years, because so many weeks, because it was very hard for water to have a way out. So water was stagnant for many weeks, and it damaged the foundations, the brick foundations of this archaeological, these archaeological sites. So the impact on heritage, which is located in urban areas, whether it is archaeological or it is the entire urban area, is definitely there, as we see from some of these examples. And this is another example I'm picking from Hanoi in Vietnam, where this very important archaeological site located right in the middle of the city is facing challenges because of the urban development that has happened around it, with the result that when there is heavy rain, a lot of the drainage pipes kind of flow into this archaeological property and then creates a kind of damage. Okay, so there is growth in flood exposure. It's not a uniform situation, as you know. Some countries are more impacted than the others, and the low-income countries are definitely suffering more. And there is this kind of a graph which just shows how uneven is the distribution. Some of the countries are definitely much more exposed to urban floods than the other ones. Now, when it comes to World Heritage cities, a lot of World Heritage cities are extremely prone to flooding, simply because of the fact that many of them are located near the river, or they are, along the ocean, along the coast. So that also kind of makes them very vulnerable, especially when there are these phenomena happening because of increased, sea level rise, or increased flooding or storms or things like that. So when you have floods, I mean, this is from 2011, a little bit old, but it just shows you all those dark purple dots are those World Heritage cities. You will see that at that time, Ahmedabad and Jaipur were not part of the World Heritage City, but you can see that so many of them are dark purple colored, means that they are extremely vulnerable to floods. And then associated with floods, many of those cities which are along the hill slopes are also at risk of landslides. And this is just to show you that it's not like one event, but there are multiple events that get connected because of that one major event. And and the fact, as I told you, bushfires in Australia last year, this year in California, and not only forest areas are affected, but when there are sites, archaeological sites located in the middle of the forest area, like in India as well, there are so many sites which are in the middle of a forest. Whether you take Bhimbetka or any other, those or Ajanta Ellora, then when you have fires in the forest around it, then definitely these archaeological or other kind of historic sites are also vulnerable. Let's move from these catastrophic events to what climate change does to because of the slower factors. So slower factors, as I already mentioned, can be sea level rise, and this is just one example from Jamestown in United States, where this whole entire site is going to be under the water because of the sea level rise in 50 years time. Not so long if you look at the what may happen to this site. So in India as well, there are a lot of sites along the coast. There are many archaeological sites along the coast. Old ports are there, and definitely they are at risk in another few decades because of rising sea level. And the rate of weathering, weathering is not a new phenomena. I mean, we can't say that weathering is happening because of climate change, but the rate of weathering, the rate of erosion is going to be increasing more and more. And this is one of the studies that was done in Scotland, and here you can see that they figured out that the rate of erosion has increased multifold over last few years. So as I was mentioning to you earlier, climate change also has an effect on conflicts and on human-induced events. Now, you may wonder, like, how is it going to happen and how is it going to affect cultural heritage sites? But then there is this clear example where the archaeological sites in Mongolia, because these people who were nomadic herders, they were really relying on the local rainfall, the grazing that they would do for their cattle, and then because of more droughts, they are not able to earn their livelihood. And when they're not able to earn their livelihood, they are shifting. And there was a study which showed that they're going now they're digging a lot of the things which were buried underground to sell them, to earn their living. So then again, you see that there is a indirect impact on cultural heritage sites as well. So this is the scenario we are in right now. We have multiple things affecting our historic cities. You may have a sea level rise phenomena, but you may also have increasing cyclones and then flooding, and then that combines with fire. And then you see the resulting impact makes the disasters very complex to address. It's not simply like saying you will do a cyclone plan and you will do a flood plan, or you will do another thing for sea level rise. You have to think in a very comprehensive manner, or what we call in a multi-hazard manner, to deal with all these catastrophic hazards that and the slow hazards that are combining together to create this negative impact on historic cities. So let's come back to home and look at what happened in Uttarakhand in 2013, where you all know how the flash floods really had a huge impact. And I want to bring forward a key point through this example. If you look at the way the flooding happened, a lot of infrastructure meant for tourism, like hotels and all those, which were created along the floodplain of the river, you must have seen the images that they collapsed. A lot of structures just settled down when water came in, because they were not in a proper, the soil conditions were not proper. They were in the floodplain area. And also because you can see in this image like how water just came in. But when we look at why so much water came in, it's not just a question of having a heavy rainfall, because rainfalls do happen during monsoon time, but this rainfall occurred a month before in June, which is not normally a very heavy rainfall season in Uttarakhand or in the north of India. So there was already a change in the temperature, in the climate pattern, with rains coming a month earlier, but the temperature was much higher. So when this heavy rain happened, and because the temperature was high, you had a glacier, which was already melting. A large amount of glacier just came down, you see, along with this heavy rain. So the glacier brought with it a lot of silt. And what you see you must have seen this in Kedarnath temple, a lot of this, silt was deposited. Half of the structure was almost buried, you see. So this was because a lot of water came in. So you can also, a lot of silt came in with the water. So you can understand, like, you have a double phenomena of heavy rain combined with climate change, and a kind of development along the riverfront, which is combining together. And then this kind of an embankment which is created along the river just to prevent the water to get out. But when you prevent it on one side, it breaks open on the other side. And you could see that this is what really happened. And then, as I said, the soil was not proper, and there was a lot of erosion that was going on. There were also many landslides that happened along with this. And one of the reasons why the landslides really happened was because there was already a lot of deforestation that had happened. And if you look at the traditional settlement pattern in this region, they were never constructing on the lower level of the hills. They were always constructing in the mountain slopes on the higher area, because that was a kind of a better for them, because they had an understanding of how the the pattern of events or the exist in that region. So climate change, in fact, is exacerbating complex crisis, and that is very much linked to the kind of territorial development that's happening around, and that definitely has to be taken into account when one understands like what is the impact on cities. So this is an important point I want to mention, that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius with no or limited overshoot would require rapid and far-reaching transitions in energy, land use, urban and infrastructure, and industrial systems. And most of these are concentrated in cities. And so that's why, whether it is historic or not, I mean, it's not a question that we have to look at historic cities separately and forget about the larger urban development, but we have to look at them together. And that's the most important thing for us, to look at the way urban development is happening and how do we address our historic urban areas in the context of the larger development that's taking place. So let's quickly go through the factors which are increasing the vulnerability of heritage to climate-related hazards. And these are the factors that we have to be addressing, because yes, climate is changing. Yes, we have more rains, and those factors are there. But along with that, we are also creating some things in our cities, or the phenomena in the city, which is making them more vulnerable to climate-related events. So the first thing we all know, as I mentioned before, is that urban and rural population, if you look at the division, there are much more people now moving to cities. So the density is getting much higher. And this diagram just tells you like the number of people living in urban areas is going to be more and more. You see how it is exponentially increasing. And so in 2050, you will have lot more people living in cities. And this is worrying, which also means that the density in some cities is much higher in bigger towns compared to the others. So in India, of course, its urban density is much higher in bigger cities or mega cities or large metropolitan cities like Delhi or Bangalore or or Mumbai. But there are also other cities where the urban density is going to be more. But this is something I want you to be having a careful look at, because this is something very connected to how urban heritage is going to be impacted in the future. If you look at this figure, it's a work done by IIHS, Indian Institute for Human Settlements, a couple of years ago, and I think it shows a very interesting phenomena. What it shows is that the number of small and medium-sized towns, they are really increasing a lot in terms of the percentage of urban growth. So the urban growth in big cities is getting more stagnated, but the urban growth is in small and medium-sized towns is increasing much more. And that's something we have to be very careful about, because I think we tend to look at cities in general and forget that the impact on, let's say, a small town in Junjunu or somewhere in Shekhawati or Hubli or somewhere would be very different than what's happening in a bigger city like Jaipur or Bangalore. Because in one case, you will have a lot of urban pressure, and this phenomena will be there, like 300 million people coming. But you have to keep in mind that these 300 million people who are going to be added in next 30 years, or now let's say in 10 years, will be concentrated in very few cities, not all the cities. So it's very unevenly distributed. It's more concentrated on the big cities, but what we will see gradually is that the small and medium-sized towns are the ones where there might be a pressure to grow. And so a lot of urban heritage which is located in those cities is going to be at much higher risk in the future, where it is still surviving, but in the future, which direction it is going to take is something that we have to think about. So this is how urban growth is projected to happen. Let's say in another 10, 11 years, and you can see that it's higher, but all these, these big blue dots are those mega cities where many of the surrounding towns are going to come together, and there's going to be a huge urban agglomeration. But there would be these green dots, which are more important for us to keep in mind, because these green dots are the ones where we are going to experience a very high urbanization in next 20, 30, or 40 years. And these cities and towns, which have a very important urban heritage, are going to be at much higher risk, and a lot of heritage is at risk of being lost. So this is something that we have to keep in mind. And if you look at it, you also will understand that in the top 100 largest cities, 43% of the GDP is produced. So these cities also concentrate economy in a small area, and this figure is very mind-boggling. You see, if you, that it says like 43% of GDP with 16% of the population and just 0.24% of the land area. So if something happens to cities, there will be devastating impact on the GDP of the whole, the entire economy of the country is going to be impacted. And so that's something we have to be also very mindful of. And the fact that with the amount of land area, where actually which is producing all these greenhouse gas emissions and producing these things which are going to have a climate change impact, is a very, very small fraction of the total amount of land. So that's how we are this is the risk that we are at right now. So look at this. In the earlier slide, I was telling you it's just 0.24% of the land area. Now I tell you that in that 0.24% of the land area, CO2 emissions are there, and which is going to have an impact on cities. So I mean, it just clearly shows that if you have to really make any significant impact on climate change anywhere in the future, you have to really work at cities in a very exclusive manner somehow. So how does this urbanization process impact historic cities? That's something we have to also understand, because this urbanization is really creating vulnerability that we need to understand the process of this. So if you go to any big city, you see that there are multiple cities in one city. And you in the West, you have the concept of historic center or a historic urban core, but in India we don't have a one center. We have multiple historic centers spread around one city. If you come to Delhi, you can go to Nizamuddin and you can go to another area, let's say Mehroli or somewhere else, and they will be all historic small clusters, but they're all part of the larger city. So that's the kind of situation you are in, where you just cannot separate a historic urban area and say, like, I'm going to make a policy which is only focusing on that, with totally overlooking the fact that it's so much juxtaposed with the larger urban fabric that you have to define strategies which are more interconnected. So this is exactly what we see in every part of big cities, right? Like, you have these historic fabric, and it is at high risk of being taken over by real estate development, being built over. So that's, of course, one important element. But the fact is that it's not only heritage sites which are at risk in themselves. There is also what's happening around them. This is Nepal, Kathmandu, and what we're looking at as a Bhaktapur World Heritage Site. And then what you see here is very clear, right? I mean, the impact is going to come from what kind of developments are happening around the city. So on one hand, you have to understand the two things happening simultaneously. On one hand, you have this whole increase in carbon emissions. You are having the entire kind of development, which is not where you have a climate change impact happening, which is more global phenomena, which will have a impact locally. But on the other hand, there are other phenomena happening in cities where there is a transformation going on, where the historic fabric is getting subdivided. You will have multiple ownerships in one houses, so it's very hard for you to manage these cities, and especially when you have migrants coming in. So this is another issue you have to kind of start linking when you have to deal with historic cities and the challenge of climate action, and that is dealing with people who are not from the city but they are migrating from outside. Yes, we have seen in the pandemic what has happened, that a lot of those people who were living in the cities moved out to their villages, and so when they come and they occupy these areas or they live in those areas, how is it going to function? Number one, in terms of their relationship to the historic city, in terms of the economic viability of maintaining them, the physical infrastructure and the physical built fabric. These are the crucial issues that you have to address, because if you don't do that, you will have also situations where this beautiful Haveli in the middle of world hated city of Ahmedabad is just not being occupied. I mean, it is abandoned because the family has moved out. There's nobody there, and it is at high risk of fire. And on one day it will be demolished. Real estate developer will just take it over, and then it will be gone. So that's the kind of anyways a kind of situation that we are facing in the cities, regardless of the fact that the climate is there or not there. But we have to consider these factors along with what's being done because of what's happening because of climate change. Now, I was telling you some time back that it's not a question of every city facing it the same way in terms of the impact on urban heritage. The kind of pressures are very unequally distributed. So if you have a small town, probably there will be a pressure in next 20 to 30 years when maybe things will move there. But at this moment, those towns are facing abandonment of their urban heritage. This is one of the towns in Shekhawati where there is nobody living there, and then of course it's going to fall into disuse, and maybe it will fall down one day. Maybe real estate developer will not be so interested in this because the towns don't have so much economic viability at the moment, but there is nobody to maintain them, and they will fall apart just on their own because of lack of maintenance. And along with that, you definitely in bigger cities where there's economic pressure as well, a lot of heritage is extremely vulnerable because of these demographic plus economic pressure. So this is the hard urban reality in India and many other developing countries which we have to deal with. So now let's look at cities a little bit beyond cities, because they will ultimately have an impact on the cities. So, normally we tend to really focus a little bit too much on urban area without understanding that actually that urban area is part of the larger natural setting. And in fact, many historic cities were developed because of their relationship or to the local availability of resources like water, or the local topography. This is an interesting study again done by IIHS, where you have when Bangalore was established, it was established in an area with a very interesting natural ecology, with lakes and canals, and they are interconnected, and so they were functioning in a much more sustainable manner. But look at the development that happened in Bangalore, completely destroyed that local ecology, and then you had a lot of these traditional structures. You see, this is in the middle of Bangalore. You can see that this is actually a historic dam or a kind of a water gate to control the flow of water. So this lake was actually connected to the canal, and they could restrict or limit the water when there was heavy rainfall. Also, there were these traditional systems also working in these cities which have somehow stopped to function. And because of that, you find that many of these lakes, you must have seen in the news, like I think a year or two ago, when some of the lakes, one or two lakes had fire, and it was because they became like a sewage dump, and then they just there were some gases that led to this kind of fire. So, what is this kind of urban sprawl doing to cities is something which we have to always be mindful of, because on one hand, it is damaging the water systems and the whole ingress and outgress of water, like the water coming in and water going out, like was how it was controlled. But on the other hand, there is another phenomena of what happens is that with the unregulated sprawl, a lot of agricultural land which was, or the land which was collectively used by the people living in the cities, is no longer available, because you just, some rich developer is able to buy it and convert it into some other project, or sometimes people are forced to sell it because they just can't, they need money. So, because of lack of comprehensive policies at the regional or territorial level, a lot of, the sustainability of these, traditional communities living in cities is a huge issue. Because those communities are a lot of their work is also associated with the land around their city, and it's not just focused only in the middle of the city. So once this land kind of gets taken over, then they are faced with huge issues. So if you look at the planned intervention, but also the unplanned intervention, so this is in Tibet, and in Tibet again, this is how it was traditionally. Then it slowly started to be changing, and then and you can see that because of that whole planned development, all the agricultural land is kind of taken away. So that's the kind of a problem that we have to look at when we deal with historic cities. That's why I've been saying that the policies for the urban development have to be much more territorial and comprehensive, and cannot be just focused on the historic area or a small part of the historic area. Okay, let me bring you to this other major issue we are going through right now, the issue of pandemic. It's not a question of just a virus affecting us. Actually, maybe many of you have read that there's a very clear linkage with climate change and the increased incidence of epidemics. And there is a projection that if we continue to destroy our environment, and the very fact that destroying the environment makes the eating habits of animals and are changed, and then there is much less availability of land for these animals to feed on, that they can feed on. And also, with so many people accumulated in the cities, the risk of spreading is much more. Yeah, the risk of infection is much more. So you notice that the urban areas are the ones that have faced the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic much more than the other areas. And the reason is and the cities are creating these problems, but cities are also suffering because of these problems, let's say like that. And the other issue, which is also very important, which is connected to the sustainability of cities, is the fact that there is much and more reliance on only one kind of tourism, right? So if you come to Florence or Rome, it's full of tourists, and all the livelihoods are only focused on one kind of tourism, right? And then what happened? For 3 months during the lockdown, there was no way that people could, and afterwards as well, when the number of tourists really fell down, there was no way in which there were any other livelihoods that could support these local people. And so one of the things that we have to also think about is how to diversify livelihoods in the city, because more and more livelihoods of residents in historic urban areas are focused or limited to mass tourism, and that's not going to be sustainable. So you have to diversify into other kinds of livelihood opportunities in the city. And along with that, you have other disasters happening when the COVID-19 happened, right? So we had a huge cyclone coming in Bangladesh and in India, and had a huge damage. And we all know that they combined, it was COVID-19 situation before, and then you had pandemic. You had this heavy rainfall. So we have to also be aware that disasters seem to be collaborating with each other more than ever. There are these multiple kind of events that are combining together, and we really need to kind of address this complexity in order to really be able to do something effective. Otherwise, I think we will be fighting something which we will not be able to really address. The thing that we have to keep in mind always, and I always wanted to be there in my presentation, because as architects, many of you are architects, right? And as architects, we sometimes forget the social part of the cities, because we only look at the urban fabric. We look at the, what is beautiful, what is architecturally nice, but there is a lot of concentration of poor people in cities, and cities are impacting them more than the others. It's not an equal impact on everyone, right? And you have to also be mindful of the fact that a lot of urban heritage is surviving because of these poor people. Just because, of course, not to justify that they live in poor conditions, but the fact is that in the absence of any regulations or guidelines to protect heritage, the only way this heritage survives in many, many cities is because just the poor people have no money to invest, even if they want to change that urban fabric. So when we deal with the vulnerability of cities and look at the intersection of the different vulnerabilities with what's happening because of climate change, I think it's very important to not just focus on the physical and aspect, but really look at the socio-economic aspects and how they are unequally distributed in the city, and what would be the impact of that unequal distribution on the urban heritage located in the city. So I want to kind of summarize this issue with looking by making you look into these three things which kind of exist together. One is the urban system, like how does a city work? That's like the whole system of functioning of a city, where people live, where people stay, how the social structure is divided in the city, where the heritage is just how it is distributed. That's one part. The other part is definitely what climate change is doing in terms of the increasing the microclimate, microenvironment of the cities, or the absence or the lack of resources available there, or the kind of catastrophic events to which the city is getting more exposed because of climate change. And the third circle, which I think is as equal as the others, is the as I mentioned in my previous slide, the impact on the vulnerable groups located in the city. Right now, you must be wondering, as a heritage professional, where is heritage there? Actually, heritage has to be integrated in all these factors, and we can't just put another circle of heritage, because that means that we are kind of trying to look at it in a very exclusive manner, which might be nice for us to think as a wishful thinking, but this is not the fact of our urban environment today. So if we have to have a strategy to address urban heritage, we have to kind of think of this intersection between urban systems as they are, or how does the city work, what are the climate change impacts on the cities, and who is more vulnerable, who is not able to really respond to these shocks and stresses. So I think that's a very important thing for us to have that holistic picture in mind when we deal with cities. So now I'm going to slowly move to what do we do for climate action. We have understood what's happening. We are all, maybe you are all getting very depressed about it, but we have to find solutions. We have to come up with innovative ideas. So my next few slides are going to tell what we should do, what we can do, what is going on even at the moment. So I'm going to even show you a few initiatives that are being taken up. And I think it's very important that in India, we take it up at multiple levels, at the policy level, at the planning level, and even at the level of research, because I think a lot of research in this area is required. So I think an important thing for us is to be able to really look at what is going to happen to our various historic cities in India. Until or unless we are able to create scenarios, or make a risk map of which cities or which urban area is more vulnerable to which kind of disaster event or which kind of a phenomena because of climate change, we are not going to be able to really prioritize. So it's very crucial that we start to work on a kind of risk map, which takes into account not only just catastrophic disasters, but also the climate change impacts, which could be also slow and progressive. So this is one of the initiatives that has been taken up and our next few slides are all done by this one very very innovative institute called Fraunhofer Institute in Germany. So, and there is also an initiative being taken up at the European Union level. So the fact is that we really need to look at making risk maps for heritage, factoring in all these different elements that I just explained to you. And then we need to work at different levels, So I'm just showing you this one example. So if you have to really address what may happen to one historic, building, you may have to look at it at a different scale, right? For the scale of the building and its surroundings, at the level of the building, at the level of interiors, the objects that are there inside, right? So here you see, if you have to think about where that heritage building is located, how does it fit within the larger understanding of the changing environment today and in the future? And I think that's something I want to emphasize and again, that it's not about just deduction, it is about prediction, right? We are really looking at what may happen in the future and trying to address it today. So doing a lot of modeling at different scales and looking at the impact at different scales is very critical. So there are a lot of studies done at the building level. So here you can see there is a projection there at a much, you can see the scales, right? You see the scale, which is much larger at the continent level, and then you go down all the way to the building level and see how that's going to have an impact. So by doing this kind of predictive modeling, there is already a lot of predictive modeling done for climate change effect, but maybe the factor of impact on heritage has to be brought in, and I think there's a lot of potential to do that. And on one hand, you look at the larger kind of impacts in terms of the more floods and more storms and more these climate events, but on the other hand, we have to also see what's going to happen in terms of the deterioration or the damage processes which are slow. For example, in some places where there were no termites, we can expect that in another 20 to 30 years or 50 years, we will have more termites. In this case, if there were no molds in certain places, but there are going to be more molds or microorganisms growing, and that's of course going to affect a lot of historic fabric, right? If it is a wooden fabric, it's going to have a lot of impact. So we have to make these connections between the larger environmental changes happening, making a good assessment of that at different scales, and then trying and understanding how it's going to affect those physical fabric, that it could be just a small deterioration there, but it has a much larger connection at coming at different levels. So that's what I want to emphasize as the first kind of thing that we must look at and work on. And there's already some work being done, but I think we require a lot more work done. And I want to emphasize not only at the building level, but now we need to do climate modeling for historic urban neighborhoods as well. So not look at just one structure, but a cluster of structures, in terms of look at Ahmedabad. I mean, you should look at the whole pole in Ahmedabad and do a climate modeling for that pole. Or not only one pole, you could look at whole part of the city and do a modeling in terms of how that's going to impact, right? So from the building level, you have to also look at this kind of modeling. So what do we need to do in order to ensure sustainability of urban heritage in the light of climate change and this urbanization? I have shown you all these different things. First thing definitely is the assessment of climate risks, which I've just shown you that we need to do. And now let us look at what interventions we need to make for cities. Now, there are two major interventions that we always talk about. One is mitigation, and the other one is adaptation. And it's very important for you to also understand that mitigation for climate change is different than mitigation for disaster risks. So for climate change, you need to reduce carbon emissions, right? So today we talk about green buildings. Exactly, what is environmentally friendly building, but we need to think about how can we reduce carbon emissions through in many of our historic buildings. I mean, they already have many times inherent features which are climate friendly, But sometimes if you have to do upgradation or you need to change the use, you need to look at the climate efficiency as well in terms of the infrastructure you're going to put in there. And then when we look at mitigation for disaster risks, we have to think about reducing the impact of all these major events like floods and storms that are going to affect cities, and how do we deal with them. And then comes adaptation. Like, you cannot change floods to happen, right? You cannot change the way the environment is changing, but can we change the way we do conservation measures? Can we change the way we build our constructions traditionally? Can we do some kind of a we, rather than controlling things, we try and adapt the way we do things to this new, the new normal, as we all are now used to, right? So IPCC has brought this very interesting diagram that I'm just showing you here, which I think kind of shows how you can do both mitigation for climate change and also adaptation. And you can simply see that if you are looking at mitigation and then you are looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and then you have to see what kind of development cities should do, whether we should in fact invest in too much infrastructure that creates a lot of carbon emissions. Should we have too much of paving in the cities, which is going to increase the amount of that which is going to reflect a lot of heat, and also the question of how are we going to manage our cities. And then on the other hand, we need to look at adaptation, where we look at how do we adapt the food and the water resources to which that are available to us, right? We will not have so much food so rather than always keep on thinking of increasing food production, is there a way in which we can diversify our food, or is there a way in which we can deal with our ecosystem so that we don't destroy it, but we try to kind of live with it. We don't create situations like what we have done in Bangalore or those cities like those. And definitely, if you see here, there's one important thing here: human health, which I think is now very much in the limelight because of the pandemic. Okay, so a lot of mitigation and adaptation measures. I'm not going to get into them, but just to tell you that this is a huge area of work, because what we have to look at in an Indian context is looking at all these interventions from the fact that we don't have enough economic resources, our social habits, and the fact that people have aspirations. So how do you deal with the balancing between all these different parameters? It's not straightforward technical solution, but you need to think of different options. I think that's an important. And the other thing which I want to emphasize is the correlation between climate action and disaster risk management, right? So you can't just focus only on climate action only, but not look at disaster risk management. In India, Ministry of Home Affairs is dealing with disaster management, and Ministry of Environment is dealing with climate action. So there is no coordination between them, but you can see that they are all interconnected. So how can we have these policies? So very quickly, I think I'm not going to take too long now, because we have already, I think, passed 1 hour. I think it would be good to have some discussions as well. Is the fact that there are many interesting solutions we can have in our cities by increasing, more provision for water channels, or opening up some of those places which we have closed down, use it for multiple purposes. This is from Japan. Using the local, traditional water wells or traditional water systems, not only relying on the pipe water supply, allowing for the recycling of water, which is kind of comprehensive, even for disaster prevention measures, creating a water tank, where you store the rainwater so that you can use it when it is required, and use it for. This is another project from Japan, where again you're not relying on electricity, but you are relying on the gravitational force, so that water just comes in without use of too much electricity. So I think again these kind of solutions have to be thought about, and these have to be also kind of linked with communities engagement, because you can't just come up as a technical solution. You have to engage with the traditional neighborhoods and develop innovative solutions. So this is the one part of the conclusion that I want to make, is to look at mechanisms of change in cities. Think about innovation, uh, think about expansion. So when I say innovation, it is really about how can we innovate new ideas, new designs, new solutions, expansion and application. So how do we multiply what we do? We may do one small thing, but how can we replicate it at a much larger scale? Because that has to be replicated. Otherwise, one small intervention, one place won't make change. Reorganization, that is, how do we really work with changing the governance structures? You see, this is another major problem, as I mentioned to you. If ministries, departments are not talking to each other, if Ministry of or Department of Heritage or non-heritage professionals are all in silos, you need to really reorganize the way people coordinate at the institutional level and at the governance level. And of course, reorientation, which is about reconfiguration of social values and social relations. And that is really important. How do you change people's attitudes? How do you change social power relations? How do you strengthen the capacities of people who are powerless or marginalized? So all these factors are important for us to, and I call them as mechanisms of change. And then let me move to the other mechanism, which will be my last part of the slide of my presentation, and that's about mechanisms of continuity. When I say mechanisms of continuity, I'm really trying to say, how can we utilize what we have already learned through traditional knowledge in terms of managing microclimate, ecological, how to make sure that our ecological footprint doesn't exceed. How do you ensure social and economic sustainability? And there are lots of lessons that we can learn from our urban heritage on dealing with these situations. So I just quickly show the slides. These are from Nepal, like how courtyards, in many of our urban areas, even in India, in many parts of the world, there's a very localized climatic control systems in the way cities are designed. How do we really work or develop on those kind of innovative solutions that have come through us through trial and error over time? So how to utilize the local availability of water resources, I mentioned to you already, rather than only relying on piped water supply. How do we look at traditional building constructions the way they have been done, where sometimes you are traditionally adapting to floods, rather than always saying, I'm going to create a embankment to stop water from coming in. I want the whole architectural design is to accept water. That's why these houses are on stilts, as you see on the image on the left side. But now with, of course, constructions on the various levels, that's not possible. How do we look at the way traditional settlements have maintained a distinct ecological relationship that has kept them for so many years, decades and centuries? In the top, you see a very important, it's actually a World Heritage Settlement of Shirakawa in Japan, where it's completely relying on, it's really a good example of local ecosystem, well preserved in the way the settlement is designed, the use of thatch, which comes from the local, material. And in the image below, which comes from, I think from Himachal, you see that how these structures are really actually oriented to gain maximum sunlight, planned around the local topography. So I think there are so many lessons you can learn in the way these cities have settlements have evolved. Or like this excellent example, which I did my research long time back, where this village in Nepal, the whole boundary of the village is really controlled, so you cannot grow beyond that boundary. And in that way you preserve, and the way you control that boundary is by having a ritual path or a procession, so people don't build around it, so that way you preserve agricultural land, you keep the local microenvironment, And then once, if the settlement grows beyond a certain point, rather than expanding it there, you actually have a development pattern where you create another new settlements a little bit distant away, rather than really just keeping on expanding it. So this is my next mechanism. So mechanism for continuity, as I mentioned, and that, so earlier I said mechanism for change, right? And now I mentioned mechanism for continuity, which is really about looking at traditional knowledge and capacity in building, planning, and management that we have to work with, build on. Look at collective coping mechanisms developed by communities through sharing of resources and social capital, and how do we sustain ecological relationships between humans, habitat, and environment. I think we need a lot of innovative solutions, innovative ideas, and we don't need to really look at traditional knowledge in a very static manner. I think an important thing is for us to really build on it, and urban heritage provides us with lot of innovative ideas. So there I end. Thank you very much.
So I think the participants can maybe put their cameras on also so that it's easier to interact. And yeah, so thank you, Dr. Rohit Jigyasu. It was, I think the imperative, of climate change and how imperative it is to address it is something that we keep on trying to shove under the carpet. But I think it's, absolutely essential for us, and we can't really hide away from it. So thanks for bringing it out again over here, and thanks for again emphasizing on how much more research is required, how much more of building this knowledge is required, and I think that's where the role of these students and academics and all of us, comes in, where we become change makers through this building of knowledge, which becomes important. So I think those fantastic diagrams that we saw, which were showing how to actually create risk maps and how to do that modeling, is of course more something that we need to further get into. But I think certainly these investigations in terms of research with respect to the traditional mapping, traditional knowledge and learning from traditional knowledge is something we certainly should all, further emphasize on and take forward, I think, and bring in some kind of framework. So a lot of these concerns that you mentioned are, of course, not to be tackled at the individual level, but are more holistic. But I think the very important message for all of us is certainly that we cannot look at any one thing in isolation. It ultimately is a holistic framework that we have to look at. So I think I will I'm looking at the chat, and I think there are a couple of questions, if we can take them up. I think one is from Savar. So he's actually currently a student with us, and he's working on the impact of COVID on the Phul Walon ki Sair in Mehrauli as a part of his research. So I think that's where his question comes in. He asks about, in addition to migration, any other dimension which is affecting heritage due to COVID-19 or the pandemic. So any pointers for him?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can make another presentation on that for him. I'm just joking. But yes, we are doing a lot of investigation on how COVID-19 is impacting heritage. And I think it's important for us to really consider different ways in which we have to relook at urban heritage and, let's say, heritage management in general. So very quickly, one is about how do we utilize, as I mentioned also in my presentation, how do we look at diversification of livelihoods when you have situations like these? How do we ensure that there is a sustainability dimension, which you ensure in a historic urban area or historic building? Number two is how do we utilize digitization and the online whatever tools are available now to do remote monitoring, to do all this maintenance, which probably we always have been used to being there and doing things, but digital technology really allows us to think of many ways of using this technology to remotely handle monitoring, which we haven't probably done, and how well you can use digitization to even do this, virtual tours, and somehow taking the pressure off the cities. So there are, of course, you can't replicate it. I mean, you can't say that people don't visit cities because you can't replicate that. But at least you can have a certain kind of diversification, that some people go and the others can, have some other option to do, and so you don't have too many people kind of concentrated in an area at one time. So definitely digital tools is one thing. Then we have to now think very strongly about how to make sure, probably we haven't looked too much about carrying capacity. And I think carrying capacity is a huge area of work. We need to determine what is the right carrying capacity, which is not having detrimental impacts on human health, along with, of course, impact on environment, impact on physical fabric, and all that. So how do we look at, how do we do capacity, the capacity, carrying capacity assessment, taking into account all these impacts on health. Then I would also mention, which is very critical, that COVID-19 pandemic is, we haven't given too much thought to dealing with biological hazards. We have looked, this is one kind of hazard, but biological hazards can be of many, many kinds. And I think in our disaster preparedness strategies, biological hazards was not functioning, was not there so much. But I think we need to, and one thing which this pandemic has made us realize is the importance of being prepared. Because if you are not prepared, a lot of chaos happened because we were just simply unprepared. So how do you bring in this preparedness element in the way we do things? So there are lots and lots of learnings and things to do. So I'm looking forward to his work once he has done it.
Absolutely, thanks. So another question, I think, from Samriti. I'm not sure if she's still here or she's had to leave, but she talks about this challenge of development, increasing demand for land in cities and for the dwellers, and keeping old buildings. So that challenge is a reality. We've all witnessed it. But how can we tackle? I don't know if there's a easy answer to be given there, but yes, still.
No, I think there is no easy answer, as you said. There's a conflict of keeping old buildings as heritage, but I think we should not keep them as heritage. I mean, the problem is the moment we stamp them as heritage, somehow you alienate people from them, and you think they are some things to be just admired because they are old and historic. But I think an important thing for us is to really make sure that they are not there because they are historic, but they are actually an asset that can be still used and upgraded. And and that's why we do a lot of thinking we need to do in terms of how do we ensure that there is a change, but a change that keeps that asset, but also addresses the needs of the community. So I think it requires a fundamental shift in the way people think about heritage. And also I think change has to be very much part of the way we deal with heritage. I mean, for long, I still remember, I want to just give one little story of that, because I think that's important for us to understand where we have moved from where we were. When I first attended my ICCROM meeting in 2007, and I was in these group of very highly known for conservationists. They were all talking about the moment when somebody started to speak about change. For them, it was like something like, how do you say, and a word that is not acceptable. No, change is nothing that we can accept as conservationists, because we are all about preserving what we have. But I think from that time to like in 13 years, I think now change is very much accepted. And what we say is conservation is actually a way of managing change. So I think with that, you need to kind of reorient yourself in order to really make this, shift. And then we will be able to kind of reuse a lot of those buildings which are still there, but probably we just think of them as heritage to be just preserved.
Absolutely. In fact, as I think you already mentioned that over a decade and or so, this kind of a thought process has changed. And I think at our school and the program, we are constantly looking at making heritage relevant. So that is the most important concern that we are looking at, where it becomes relevant and connected with the everyday lives of people. So certainly a very, very important point there. So here Raman has one question, maybe the last one. So his question is that he talks about the huge impact of urban sprawl, which is focused towards making new structures and destroying cultural heritage. How can we adopt a better practice in your view to help us appreciate the built heritage more? So it's somewhere connected with Samriti's earlier question, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I think I would like to address it from one comment, through one comment which I didn't make. I think we need to have a fundamental change in the way we do planning. For long we had this master planning approach of dealing with cities as red, yellow, blue, green, and we make these plans and we kind of say, okay, cities, this is what city is gonna be like. But I think an important part for our planning has to really be, as I was mentioning even in my lecture, a territorial planning, right, where you integrate or mainstream heritage in the urban planning process. So what we need to do in order to make things work is mainstreaming all the way. Mainstreaming of heritage, mainstreaming of climate change. We come up with solutions which are not separated for, okay, I will do this for climate change, I will do this for heritage, I will do this for urban infrastructure. I think what we need to do is have more holistic solutions where you take into account all these, these are all parameters which we have to put in front of our table and then start to arrive at solutions. I think what we have to come up with is innovative solutions. I mean, there's no way we can say preserve this area, make it a historic core, and that's where we solve the problem of conservation. So I think we really need to go beyond that mindset. And I think a lot of change in the planning approach is even required. And that also leads to my point, which I mentioned, the governance issue. Urban governance, especially in our cities, and I think there are many good practices we can adopt, because the problem is like our governance is very siloed. We have different departments and ministries, and they never even talk to each other, don't even know what left hand is doing, it doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And I think that kind of situation is not gonna anyways work also. So you also need to do these fundamental shifts in the way we govern our cities, where we have to work with it. Of course, these look like things which are impossible to do and are far beyond our reach, but at least we start working towards it. I mean, slowly we have to go beyond. If we don't push the envelope, we will just be always kind of be in a comfort zone, with the status quo.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think it's a great opportunity for all of us here, because with the various kinds of master's programs that we have in our built heritage, interior architecture, landscape architecture, and urban design, and along with that, the planning school in parallel. So I think academic institutions like us probably have a huge role to play, where we look at things holistically and inculcate that approach.
Absolutely, and I think academic institutions have to encourage innovation and new ideas, not evidence, because that's why I always believe that assessment is very important. I mean, if you don't do proper assessment, you will not come up with, you can just be sitting in your drawing room and making good design proposals. But how do I base my solutions on very sound decision making, on what evidences I collect, how do I analyze them, how do I put them forward? I think that whole thing has to come in our education to be able to be better professionals.
Great. So I think I would request now Dr. Vibhuti Sachdev, our dean, to give some closing comment.
Thank you. I enjoyed that very much, Rohit. I think your points were very pertinent. I want to close this by inviting you to our institution. Please do come and have a look, because there are a lot of things that you talked about. We have initiated within the MArch Built Heritage program. The fact that the context of heritage matters and the community matters, and how it kind of revitalizes the area, and it's not a standalone thing. And also, more significantly, what we are doing within the creative cluster is making students used to working with designers and planners more closely. So this is not just an idea and thought. We are cross-bridging the three schools very, very proactively. We have common electives, we have common courses, we have common lectures, so that planners and designers and architects get used to working together, and that is what we do in the field. And also one more initiative which we've taken is using Gurgaon as a learning city, and we do a lot of interventions. We do Heritage Watch Days, as you may know. And so, given an opportunity, we would like you to please come and look at the curriculum we have initiated, and would love your feedback on it as well, because this is an area that would benefit from your intervention. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And I also want to take this opportunity to mention that students, once they finish, they should apply for internships at ICCROM. ICCROM offers internships. I mean, there are different programs for which they can apply, and that will give them a very good exposure to be at one of the premier organizations and get to know what kind of state-of-the-art, projects are initiated. And also, I would suggest that we are also at ICCROM trying to have as much collaboration with universities, because as you were saying, universities produce new knowledge, and that knowledge has to somewhere get to also out from those universities to help upgrading the professional knowledge. Because a lot of our professionals also need to upgrade their knowledge, and I think a lot of research coming out of these universities have to be fed into that effort. So that also we need to think about. So when I'm there in Delhi next time, I'll be very, very happy to come over and look at what you are doing, exciting works that you have been involved with. Thank you very much for giving me that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a very good evening now. I suppose it's evening by now. And it was really, really, I think lots of appreciation coming in the chat box from Professor Sangeeta Bagga, from our faculty, from various students, from, Poonam Verma, Mascarenas, all of them, Harminder Singh, lots of appreciation. So I will close it here on that note, and thank you for your time. Thank you for the insights, and it's been lovely interacting, and we hope to continue the interactions, and I think take up these opportunities that you mentioned with ICCROM. So that will be lovely.
Absolutely. Look forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. All right, sir.